Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, my fine friends. Welcome to episode 10 of the 12th season of the Tom Petty Project podcast. I'm your host, Kevin Brown. This is the weekly podcast that digs into the entire Tom Petty catalogue, song by song, album by album, and includes conversations with musicians, fans, and people connected with Tom along the way. Now, I say it's weekly, but I do have to apologise for my absence last week. I had our annual general meeting at my day job. I do have a day job that gets in the way of me podcasting, which really sucks. But it was an intense, very enjoyable and very good 3 days, but very intense 3 days of meetings, socials, and then a lot of evening follow-up work. So throw coaching into that mix on the Wednesday, and it left me with very little time. And so I didn't want to do a disservice to this week's song by rushing it. As a quick note too, I went to, I think is my first show post-COVID, this past Office Arena show this past weekend. Me and my pal and Ultimate Catalog Clash co-host Corey Morissette went to see ZZ Top, who I've never seen before. And they were everything I hoped they would be. Very cool, no nonsense, and a whole hell of a lot of fun. So for me, seeing Jesus Just Left Chicago, LaGrange, Just Got Paid, I'm Bad, I'm Nationwide, My Head's in Mississippi, Two Snake Boogie, and then all the tracks they did from Eliminator was just a blast. And I'd say Just Got Paid it's got to be in my top 10 favorite riffs of all time. So it was amazing watching them do that one. And they did it a little bit slower too, which kind of added even a little bit more of a layer more of grease, which I really enjoyed. The Wallflowers was the opening act too, which, I mean, those guys are fantastic. A superb rock and roll band. And I don't remember the last show I saw where the opener was as good as or better than the main act. Maybe the last time I can remember when I saw Billy Idol open for Bon Jovi back in 93. That might be the last time it's ever happened. And coincidentally and very wonderfully, as the Wallflowers are headlining the Tom Petty weekend in Gainesville this year, I'll see them twice in 6 months, which will be the first time I can remember ever seeing a major act twice in the same calendar year. Now, on the downside, I wasn't able to travel to see Mike and the Dirty Knobs in the province just to my west, Alberta. And just through a confluence of financial and scheduling restraints, it just didn't work this year. So I'm really hoping that the stars align and he does come back, or they do come back through Canada in the next couple of years. And now that he's been, hopefully he's enjoyed the crowds and the Canadian hospitality, and hopefully he'll come back. Okay, let's head over to social media, where there was a good amount of chatter about the last song we covered, Won't Last Long. And I was taken to task by quite a few of you for rating this one too low. So let's start with the poll. And maybe I was a little harsher on this one than I could have been, but a 6 out of 10, still a passing grade. And I didn't say that I didn't like the song. I just felt that it was maybe a little hurried and maybe not as compact as it could have been. I don't know. Now, during my conversation with Nick Apostolarius, which many of you really enjoyed, and thanks for all your feedback on that. It was great for Nick to hear your comments and that you enjoyed the episode. But Nick offered a completely different take on Won't Last Long, and especially the ending, which was a slight sticking point for me. And the poll came back with me in the minority for once. So it doesn't usually happen where I'm at odds with you guys, the listeners, but 13% of you actually rated this one a 10 out of 10, with the 61% majority coming in at a 7 to 9, while only 26% landed with me in the 1 to 6 range. Over on Facebook, the Honourable Pete Nestor of the Honest and Unmerciful Record Review podcast commented, "Sure, this song goes on longer than it needs to, but there's a beautifully ramshackle nature to it, starting right up top with that false open before the groove locks in, and then of course ending with the tape noise, giving it that analog feel that Tom always liked, breaking that third wall and letting you somehow feel like you're part of the process. The rough edges have always endeared me to it, and I like the driving end, very similar to Running Down a Dream, except Mike's solo stays buried in the mix, and the groove instead takes the song into the fade. Quirky in all the right ways." And I think I'd said that this song doesn't really have a solo, but both Pete and my pal and former guest Will Porteous both pointed out to me that I'm wrong on this. But as Pete says, the lead guitar is really well buried, and to me it's more just an instrumental passage than truly a solo, but again, I'm perfectly happy to be wrong on this. I also love that idea of Tom breaking the third wall, Pete. I'm going to have to reconsider my position on this one, maybe. Especially as executive producer extraordinaire Paul Roberts chimes in. Great pod as always, Kev. Thanks, Paul. Not sure I'm as down as you are about this track. Yep, the 30 seconds of nonsense at the end is not needed. As a CD listener for ages, I thought it was an intro to Billy the Kid. This is a feel-good musical tune that I always associate with a tonal reset after the intensity of Echo. A great tune that works in the context of its position on the album. An easy 8 for me. And again, I find myself not really able to argue too strongly, especially on the tonal shift. And the sequencing is, definitely very specific and very well thought out. So JP Kaufman then adds to the mix, okay, what if Tom was trying to tell himself it won't last long, but didn't really believe it? And then the song goes on too long, showing it actually is lasting longer than expected. The end of the song becomes a statement rather than dragging on. Now, can we pull you up to a 7? A stretch, I know, he says in brackets. I'm at an 8 because of listening to it in the car primarily. The end kind of works. Another great song to drive to. He is the best highway companion indeed. I really enjoyed your points about the rare and unexpected psychedelic interlude. And yeah, I think I could likely come up to a 7, but yeah, man, I have a few older songs that I might need to revisit before I start changing my mind on this one. Imagine, I have this one rated above anything that's rock and roll already. What in the name of all that is green was I thinking on that? I've got to revisit anything that's rock and roll. Anyway, after all this dissent, thankfully my pal Steve Ursel over on Blue Sky was more or less on the same page as me, commenting, it's a solid rocker, not quite at the very level of some of the others, but an enjoyable album track. Over on Instagram, however, Chris Fritz, which is at @ChrisFritz_music, wrote, Echo is Tom's second most underrated album, only after Long After Dark. Great job so far this season, even though I disagree with this week's 6 out of 10. Boo! It's a solid 8 out of 10. And again, I think that conversation about which Tom's most underrated album is definitely going to be some sort of panel discussion at some point, so look out for that. And maybe, you know what, maybe I'll have to get Chris. Chris, you'll have to come on as part of that debate. And finishing up, at Couples Rob offers this suggestion. I think Tom felt he had to bring us back from the abyss after Echo, so the next 2 tracks were meant to be uplifting. His music is usually cautiously optimistic, so Echo was new territory. Yeah, new and uncomfortable territory for sure. You think about those artists who really do mind their pain and their trauma to create art, and how much that must take out of them. And I guess there's also a catharsis to that, which some people can find, helps them work through those issues. And I'm sort of immediately drawn to, when I think about that, to my former guest, Amelia McLean. Her debut album, which should be coming out this fall finally, explores a lot of childhood pain and trauma, but brings her out the other side of it a much more grounded and happy person. Anyway, thanks for all the feedback. That's the end of our socials this week. My conversations this season with all of you have been really thought-provoking and have challenged me to re-examine lots of my thoughts on this album, so I might end up having to go back and do a sort of a coda episode this season to see if I've changed my mind on any of these songs. But for now, well, we've got William H. Bonney to deal with. Okay, let's get into the song. In conversations with Tom Petty, Tom tells author Paul Zollo, I wrote that on the drive to the studio in Bug's truck. My trusty roadie Bugs was driving me to work and I got this idea for this song, Billy the Kid. I pulled out a pad as we were going over Topanga Canyon with all those curves, so I was really writing on the edge of the paper and back and forth in the truck, and I wrote it all out on the way to work and I had the tune in my head. And any songwriter will tell you that it's massively exciting when that thunderbolt of inspiration hits and words or music or both come at you all at once. In this case, Tom had the words flowing and the tune only in his head, rather than it coming from sitting around noodling on the guitar and then framing in lyrics later. And it's especially gratifying to hear for me because that's almost always how I do it. When I write, it's a specific line or a chorus, and then some basic melody is what comes first. Tom then relays that when he got to the studio and told the band, boy, I think I got a good one, they said, how does it go? And I said, well, wait a minute, I've got to figure it out. So then he sits and figures out what the chords were, changing the key on the fly to match what was in his head, which led to the unusual noises you hear at the top of the song. As Tom explains, what it is that Mike did all the engineering on the tracking dates. There was no other engineer. It's Mike hitting record while the band is playing, because the band started to play and this great feel came down and I yelled to him, hit it, hit it. And he turned around and he hit record, and then you can hear his guitar slowly kick in because he's just getting his guitar on. Tom then elaborates that they played it over and over all night, but never got a better take than that first pass with Mike bringing his guitar into the song. So they stuck with that take and left in the studio noise. And I just absolutely love that this was essentially a song that went from nothing to fully recorded with pretty much no time for anyone to think about it. And lots of songs come about that way for people, but not many of them are Billy the Kid. Okay, well, after that wind-in, that definitely sounds like the tape getting up to speed is what it sounds like to my ear. I could be wrong on that. And we don't actually hear the first beat. It lands on, I think it's like the 2-and or something is when it actually comes in. But we have a really clean acoustic guitar along with Steve Ferrone's killer groove. And I think this might actually be my favorite drum part on this record. and one of my all-time favorites that Steve ever put down. It's a really simple, modified backbeat, but the super subtle accents on the hat lifts and the ever so slightly behind the beat timing on the snare just lend it a real swagger and an attitude that I love. Okay, then you have most likely, I think, Scott Thurston adding in an electric guitar part in the left channel before Mike comes in with that, again for this album, that sort of trademark tremolo lead on the right. And in a 1999 interview with Guitar Player magazine, Mike says, I used a Gretsch Tennessean on Billy the Kid and a few other songs. My main stage guitar is a Fender Broadcaster, which I played on 2 or 3 things, along with my Gibson SG. It was pretty loose. Sometimes we'd just use whatever guitar someone was warming up on. Tom was the most consistent, and that he's generally going to play a telly if he was going electric. My job is to find new colors, so each of my guitars winds up on a record at some point or another. The bass line in this one joins the party by walking down the stairs after 4 bars and resting it into an absolutely delicious groove with that lazy kick snare pattern. The whole thing has such a spontaneous, live feel that this comes from being the first take. So it's just 6 musicians trusting their instincts and following their leader. It's what the band did on much of Let Me Up, I've Had Enough, but this is 12 years and hundreds of gigs down the road. So I think the results are a little bit more polished and maybe just a little bit more consistent. When Tom's vocal comes in, he drops right into character with that pinched, slightly nasal delivery that he often reserves for these types of songs. He also moves the start of the lines around, so he's coming into the different lines in the verses at different points in the count. As an example, he comes in really, really early on the line "Something in Your Demeanor" in a way that's pure Bob Dylan. There's an impatience to it that gives it a very sort of spiky narrative quality that I think just works beautifully for the setup for this song. Then we hit the chorus, and this is one of Tom's great sing-alongs from the very first time you hear it. Sticks in your head, doesn't it? Everyone remembers it from the first time you've heard it. Thematically, it sort of is a twin with the allegorical content of the last track, Won't Last Long. I went down hard, like Billy the Kid. I'd mentioned to Nick Apostolaris that it's interesting that he uses Billy the Kid in this way because, of course, William H. Bonney was famously shot in the back in Fort Sumner by Pat Garrett. And in an interview with Rolling Stone in 1999, the interviewer points this out and Tom replies, yeah, well, he was surprised in his room, but all that is so hard. I know that I wouldn't have consciously wanted to get any of it in writing because I was so sick of that, I didn't want to deal with it. But I think that your subconscious has a way of saying, well, we are going to deal with it. That 3-chord downward progression in the chorus is instantly memorable, and it's been used 1,000 times, of course, but they do throw in a couple of twists on the G, F, C, the 5th, 4th one, by making the C a C9, and I think the second guitar is playing a slight variation on the F in that second chord too. The result of this is a fuller, fatter sound than you'd get from just the straight major chords, and the cool thing about this song is that it's built around only those 3 chords. The chorus also features a great harmony vocal, and I think this might be both Scott and Howie doubling that harmony part. It's mixed really clearly, so it sounds like a very distinct secondary vocal part that isn't exactly following the delivery and the sort of the line that Tom is giving us, which makes it really stand out. In the turnaround then from the chorus back to the bridge, and actually ever so slightly before the chorus is done, Benmont Tench rips in with a fantastic Hammond C3 running through the Leslie speaker and just holds on that one chord before dropping back out as Tom comes back in. But as this verse heads into the second half, Benmont then adds some gorgeous electric piano, probably Fender Rhodes, I would think, as the 3 guitars all play around the progression in different ways. There's an absolutely fantastic little lick that you'll blink and miss right before the word dust. So when Tom sings, "Did you smile when you pulled the trigger and drop me in the dust?" listen really closely to the left channel. And that part, which as I say, is I'm thinking it's Scott Thurston, just before that word dust plays a very delicate slide up and then a sort of a picked lower note in the higher register. It's such a smart, effective, subtle decision that makes this song so eminently listenable, like so many other things that all the guitars are doing. We move back into the chorus again, and you can hear Tom really messing with the vowel sounds on Billy and Kid. Those 2 I sounds are really drawled and bent into a different shape, and I always love it when Tom does that. At 2:08, we then get the guitar solo over in that right channel, and Mike's playing a very lazy, bendy, melodic solo, which sounds like it's got the bass turned right down on that Gretsch, so the treble shines through with that sort of cutting precision that we hear in that treble range. And Benmont's augmenting all this with the organ, and then as we exit this section, he's playing some really funky bass electric piano notes in the left channel, while the right hand upper register is mixed over into the right. And I suspect that, well, maybe that left hand addition, sort of that bass thing he's doing, it's almost like a Stevie Wonder thing. I suspect that that's maybe an overdub. But it's another example on this record of a very simple sounding, and in this case, really only 3 chords, song, having a ton of intricacy to it, with the complementary lead lines each member of the band is contributing. All right, folks, it's time for some petty trivia. Your last trivia question was this. What is the name of the Del Shannon album that Tom produced during which he met and poached Howie for the Heartbreakers? Is it A, Total Commitment, B, Rock On, C, Drop Down and Get Me, or D, Runaway with Del Shannon? Well, Runaway with Del Shannon was the iconic first album Del released all the way back in 1961. And as much of a genius as Tom came to be, I don't necessarily think he'd have been the right choice as a producer at the age of 11. When you go look at the liner notes for that album, you're reminded of what pop music was as a form in the 50s and early 60s, as not a single song from that record is over 2:35. Rock On was released posthumously in 1991 with Jeff Lynne and Mike Campbell handling producer duties and finishing up the songs that were largely completed before Del's passing. The album also features a laundry list of petty verse characters, with Tom, Benmont, Mike, and Howie all featuring, as well as George Harrison and Phil Jones. 1966's Total Commitment was mainly comprised of cover songs and was produced by Dallas Smith, meaning that your answer is C, Drop Down and Get Me. Released on December 7th, 1981, the album featured all the Heartbreakers pitching in, as well as famously Howie Epstein. The album was something of a comeback record and was well received by critics, with Billboard saying that the album maintains a very mainstream, highly accessible commercial edge. Cashbox described the album as pure, unadulterated rock and roll joy, and stating that songs like the title cut and Sucker for Your Love stand as powerful rockers. What a thrill for Tom to be able to help one of his idols regain some footing in the eyes of the press. All right, so your question for this week is this. Excluding things like it, at, the, and, is, those types of words, which word is the most frequently found in Tom Petty song titles? Is it A, love, B, heart, C, time, or D, don't? Okay, back to the song. After this great 8-bar solo, we come back out into the last verse where we get the killer line, well, you caught me in the bedroom, cotton fever in a sweat. And I know Nick and I talked about this line, and I think, if I remember rightly, we landed on something like that feeling of having cotton in your mouth when you're in a bad way. To me, again, I thought at first it was just one of those phrases that Tom throws in here and there that sound really evocative and cool, even if you haven't heard them before, you don't know what they mean. And apologies, Nick, if I'm misremembering our conversation. I do have the memory of a dead goldfish. But in this instance, I did look up the phrase, and this is what Wikipedia has to say. Cotton fever is a condition that indicates as a fever that follows intravenous drug use where cotton is used to filter the drugs. The condition derives from an endotoxin released by the bacterium Pantoe agglomerans, which lives in cotton plants. The term was coined in 1975 after the syndrome was recognized in intravenous drug users. So it's actually a dark reference back to what Tom was going through at the time, rather than a throwaway line that fits the bounce and cadence of the song. Well, maybe as well as, more than rather than. And it's always nice when you can hit both of those marks with the same shot. There's a fantastic snare kick, fill that Steve plays between the first and second iterations of the chorus that we get to end the song, which give it a real power and hard edge to take us out. And we have everyone contributing here. All 3 guitars, Benmont's organ part, and Howie's bass. Steve again is filling in on drums. And to end the third chorus, Tom throws away the last line, Torque singing it into the outro. And when that vocal drops out and we just have the instrumentation, you get this really cool, bluesy, Rolling Stonesy vibe for the last sort of 20 seconds as the song fades. And in that fade out, listen out for some killer shredding from Benmont. I'd love to hear the entire tale of this song, just to hear what other improvisations happened. Because it is one of those songs you could have an absolute ton of fun playing around with and just play this for 8 minutes right, and just sort of noodle around with it. A lot of fun. So as we learned from Tom, this song definitely has autobiographical roots, but Tom gives us that arm's length separation by framing this as a distinct, separate character. But the message is clear. Those closest to you can often be the ones that let you down the hardest. And if you think of that line, you offered no assistance, yeah, you looked at me and lied, it ties right back to that damning last verse in Echo when Tom sings, then you just quit, you let me down. But the tone is different in this one. It's not resigned or weary. In fact, I'd say it's quite the opposite, where in Billy the Kid, there's a defiance and a resolution that gives the antagonist of Echo as an album a ray of hope that they can walk towards and keep in sight during the dark times. The song was only played 31 times on the East Coast Invasion tour in 2001, but never on the Echo tour. It was also played a couple times in, I think it was 2011, but 3 times in 2013. And there's a great version from the Fonda where Tom intros the song by talking about some years being better than others and 1999 not being a year he wants to go back to before heading into a fantastic version of the song. And I'll leave a link in the episode notes if you want to check that one out. It's a shame that this song landed on Echo because I think had it not been from this period of the band's career, I could definitely see it being one of those deep cuts that surfaced, regularly. You could pull this out 6-7 times during a tour as one of those sort of rotating, mid to late set songs that you pull out to make the fans sort of get their legs moving. And it's such a great sing-along chorus and a wonderful opportunity for each instrumentalist to stretch their legs and jam a while. Okay, Pettyheads, that's it for this week. Some songs are deep, some songs are whimsical, some are really hooky and poppy, and some are densely layered. This song manages to hit all 4 without really giving the game away as to which area it really, really belongs in, and the musical ambiguity of that is just wonderful to me. I think it's probably up there for most Pettyheads in terms of deep cuts, and for me, it's a slam dunk 9 out of 10. Tom Petty Project is a proud member of the Deep Dive Podcast Network. Go check us out at deepdivepodcastnetwork.com. I'm sure you'll find something there that you like. You can also check out my other podcast, Seaside Pod Review, a Queen podcast that I do with my best friend Randy Woods, as well as the Ultimate Catalog Clash that I co-host with my great pal Corey Morissette, who I saw ZZ Top with. And today, as I'm recording this, we just dropped our first album side in Season 6, talking about Side A of R.E.M's album, Green. Fantastic album, great band. If you're an R.E.M. fan, go check that out. Don't forget to follow me on Facebook, Instagram, Threads, and YouTube at The Tom Petty Project, and on Blue Sky at Tom Petty Project. Go follow, like, subscribe to all those things. I always tell you all this, and you've probably already done it already, so I don't know why I keep going on about it. But keep talking to me on social media, and I'll keep reading out your comments on the show. As a weekly reminder, the Tom Petty Project is not affiliated with the Tom Petty Estate in any way. So when you're looking for Tom's music, just go buy it from a local independent record seller. Or if you must stream from official platforms. If you're looking for merchandise, go to store.tompetty.com. And if you're looking for merch for this show, go to store.tompettyproject.com. Don't forget to check out the Tom Petty Nation and Tom Petty Fans Forever groups on Facebook. And make sure you also check out Tom Petty Radio on Channel 31 on Sirius XM. Until we meet again next week, keep listening to and sharing Tom's music. Try to be kind. Try to say I love you to someone at least once a day. Stay safe and healthy, and I'll be back with you next week to talk about the only song in the Heartbreakers catalogue that doesn't feature Tom on lead vocals. I Don't Want to Fight. Bye-bye.